Hello everyone, myself Janvi and welcome to Shatavari. Today we are going to start with the physiology series from which first we are going to study about the pathways. The topic which we have chosen today is the visual pathway. The image which you can see here, we are going to study this image from basic level to get the clear idea about the visual pathway. So let's begin with our pathway. The definition of the visual pathway. The optic pathway is the nervous pathway that transmits impulse from the retina to the visual center in the cerebral cortex. So as we are going to study the pathway, so this pathway has a beginning point and an end point. The beginning point in visual, specifically visual pathway, it will be retina, and the end point will be the cerebral cortex and specifically in the occipital lobe. So the visual pathway is located between these 2 points, which is the retina and the cerebral cortex. Now when we look into the receptors which are present in the retina, now we'll start with the first point or the beginning point, which is the retina. So inside the retina there are two types of cells present, which are the rods and the cones. These two are the cells which are present in retina from where our actual pathway begins. Now we are going to study this entire pathway only under 6 components, which are optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, lateral geniculate body, optic radiation and visual cortex. So if we get the clear idea about basic these 6 components, you can understand the entire pathway very easily. So we are going to study each point one by one. First we'll start with the optic nerve. Now optic nerve. For your basic understanding, this image I have put to understand the location of the optic nerve. Here we can see this is the optic nerve. The optic nerve is formed by the axons of the ganglionic cells. The optic nerve leaves the eye through the optic disc. So here it is the presence of optic disc from where the optic nerve leaves the entire eye. So now we'll start our actual pathway. This image, when we look into this image, first we are going to study about the location of the optic nerve. Keep in mind that optic nerve has basically two parts. First part is the lateral part and second part is the medial part. This red color one, this is the lateral part, and here inside it is this part of the optic nerve is known as the medial part. Similarly here this will be the medial part and here it will be the lateral part. Now when we look into exact course of the pathway, first we should understand that the fibers from the temporal part of the retina. Now retina, we know basically it is divided into two parts. First is the temporal part and second one is the nasal part. The fibers from the temporal part of retina give rise to the lateral part of the nerve. This is the lateral part which is given, which is formed from the fibers from the temporal part of retina. If we look into the medial part of the optic nerve, it is formed by the fibers from the nasal part of the retina. Two parts of retina. Temporal part, nasal part. Temporal part give rise to the lateral part of optic nerve and nasal part of retina give rise to the medial part of the optic nerve. Now this was our first point or first component of our visual pathway. So this image now it is cleared. Now next we'll study about the second component. This is the image of the optic chiasma. The medial fibers of each optic nerve cross the midline. So these we know these are the optic nerve. This is the medial part and this is the lateral part. The medial part, the medial fibers of each optic nerve, cross the midline here. Medial fiber here. It forms the optic chiasma and join the uncrossed lateral fibers. Now which are the lateral fibers? These orange ones. Blue colored are the medial fibers and orange are the lateral fibers. These are uncrossed. Crossing takes place only between the medial fibers of the optic nerve here. This crossing forms the optic chiasma. These further move to form the optic tract. Now this is the crossed fiber, blue ones, and this is the uncrossed fiber. So this totally forms the optic tract. Further we are going to study in detail about the optic tract. Keep in mind that the medial fiber, if we see here, we can look that this medial fibers comes here, crosses this medial fiber and moves on to the opposite side. So we can understand here it moves and moves to the opposite side. Similarly here comes forms the optic chiasma and moves to the opposite side. So this is the basic image of the optic chiasma. This area of crossing is known as optic chiasma. If we look into this image, here it will be the medial and the lateral fibers of the optic nerve. Optic chiasma here. The medial fibers are crossing each other, which forms the optic chiasma. Let's look into the next component. Now we are going to study about the optic tract. Optic tract is formed by the uncrossed fibers of optic nerve. Uncrossed fibers means these fibers, the lateral ones. These are uncrossed fibers. So optic nerve formed by two components. First one is the uncrossed lateral fibers on the same side. Remember, this is the same side. And the crossed fibers of the optic nerve from the opposite side. I have said earlier, these move to the opposite side. So optic tract is formed by the lateral fiber and the medial fiber from the opposite side. So this structure will be known as optic tract. So if we take a short revision, this will be the medial and the lateral part of the optic nerve. Next comes down, forms the optic chiasma. Next move forwards and forms the optic tract. Now let's look into the next component. Next is the lateral geniculate body. Majority of fibers of optic tract, we are here, optic tract. Majority of the optic tract terminate into the lateral geniculate body. This arm-like structure, this is known as lateral geniculate body. From here, the genicocalcarine tract or optic radiation arises. Basically, these lateral geniculate body are responsible for giving rise to these optic radiations. We can see here. So from optic tract till the optic radiation, here this part is the lateral geniculate body. Further, it gave rise to the optic radiations. Next is the optic radiations. The fibers from the lateral geniculate body pass through the internal capsule. For this, I have put this image. About internal capsule, we have detailed study in anatomy. So for understanding, I have put this image. Here is the presence of optic radiations, these fiber-like structures. So these are basically arise from the lateral geniculate bodies. The fibers between lateral geniculate body and visual cortex, these are basically the connection between this structure, which is the lateral geniculate body, and our end part of the visual pathway, which is the cerebral cortex. This optic radiations are present in between these two structures. Which two structures? Lateral geniculate body and visual cortex, means our brain. This is the connecting structure. Optic radiations end into the visual cortex. Basically, it starts from the lateral geniculate body, ends into the visual cortex. Now we'll study about the last part of our pathway, which will be the visual cortex. Primary cortical center for vision is called as visual cortex. What is visual cortex? It is the primary cortical center. This is located on the medial surface of the occipital lobe. Now, if we look into the lobes, here is the image. Our main lobe, which is take parts into the visual pathway or visual perception, is the occipital lobe, which is located here. So, on the medial surface of the occipital lobe, the visual cortex is located. So this is our end part of the visual pathway. We have seen at the first part that first it begins from the retina and ends in the visual cortex. So this is the end part. For extra understanding, I have put some visual cortex and their areas of visual cortex and their functions. First one is the primary visual area, which is area 17, which is mainly function of the primary visual area is visual impulses, perception of visual impulses. Next one is the secondary visual area, which is the area 18, which main function is interpretation of visual impulses. And third is the occipital eye field, which is area 19, which is mainly involved in the movement of eyes. So this was our visual pathway. I hope you have understood the entire pathway easily. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.